Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano, and today I decided to go back to a couple of decades. This was the first movie I ever saw on a DVD because it was the first movie that I owned on a DVD. It was, well, technically I didn't own it, but let's just say I owned it. It was one of the earlier Dreamworks movies, and I don't know if I'd say it's an underrated classic because it's gotten a franchise. I don't know if it's the franchise it deserves, let alone I don't know if it even really should have had a franchise. But hey, they made other stuff with it. They made shows. They eventually made another movie, which I have not seen, but we're going back to the 2D animated feature, Spirit, the Stallion of the Cimarron. Before we get started, I just want to say, if you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, feel free to comment, and ring the bell for notifications. Also, if you're on Spotify or just any other podcast site, follow this show on those platforms. When we think of DreamWorks, we often think about their CG movies, and it's understandable. Most of their movies are CG. They started their whole legacy within the 90s. Their first film was Ants, which was a CG feature, and while they had some 2D features by the early 2000s, it was mostly going straight to CG. I mean, the last one they did that was 2D was Sinbad, I believe, and that was 03. So yeah, when we think of DreamWorks, we mostly think of CG, and that's fair. But there is that period early on where they had some 2D features, and there were beautifully animated 2D features. I think most of them are good. I think most of them have become a bit underrated in the animation world, but this one's definitely one that I think is special. I really loved it when I was growing up, and while I definitely can see its flaws as an adult, I do think that it holds up better than what some people might think. So Spirit, for those of you who are unaware, is a movie about a horse who basically is out in the wild, gets taken by these soldiers. This movie's essentially taking place, I'm not sure if it's necessarily supposed to be during like the Civil War or anything like that. I mean, you do have like the main obstacles that Spirit encounters being Union soldiers, but again, I don't know if it's necessarily supposed to be the Civil War. It is during that whole period where they're slowly taking over the West, because you of course have a lot of Native Americans right there, indigenous people who are of course living out their own life and getting into their own troubles with the Union, as the Union is trying to take over the land. But we don't focus too much on that. It's really just, okay, here's a horse, gets taken in by these soldiers. They try to break him. They can't break him. The horse eventually befriends an indigenous man. They escape, bond. The man realizes that Spirit doesn't want to be a horse for people, so lets him go. Then some other stuff happens, and eventually Spirit returns to his home. Wiser horse, I guess you could say. It's very simple, and it kind of has to be. I mean, it is a movie that is from the perspective of the horse. One of the great things about this movie is that, for the most part, when it comes to the animals, the movie is silent. Like, of course, they do the animal noises and stuff like that, but the horses don't talk. The eagles don't talk. The characters are all conveying these emotions through their animation. It's only when the people are around that you hear any dialogue, and that's only through the people. And it's all just really impressive stuff from an animation standpoint. The animation, very incredible. A lot of great 2D stuff. They have a mixture of CG stuff, some of which is noticeable, but a lot of it blends in well with the movie. It is really impressive stuff seeing it, decades later, and it really makes me wish that I could see this on a big screen, just because it's just so impressive. Even when I first saw it, I only saw it at home on DVD. So it is definitely something that I think is beautiful to watch. Like, even if you're not too into the story, you'll probably appreciate the animation on display. It's just, and I know this is the big thing that keeps some people from loving it, and I fully understand, even though I don't think it's as big of a problem. It's a shame that they weren't fully confident in the visuals of the story, that they decided to add in Matt Damon. Now, I don't know if Matt Damon was like the whole narrator, because Matt Damon is essentially playing Spirit, but only as a narrator, explaining what's going on. And I don't know whether or not he was there from its inception, like if they always had plans to have a narrator, or maybe after a few test screenings they realized, like, okay, kids are not understanding this, we got to put in a narrator. Because as far as I know, there's no mention of that, but I do think that could be a possibility, just because it does kind of come out of nowhere. And while he doesn't necessarily ruin the movie, he's just repeating what's going on. At the very least, the biggest thing I'm grateful for is that he's not, saying a bunch of slang or hip terms or anything like that. Like, it's very much just like telling you, like, okay, this is what I feel, this is what is going on, blah, blah, blah. Very straightforward. Not necessary, but at the very least, it doesn't feel like it's necessarily pandering to the lowest common denominator. It's very much just, okay, let's explain what's going on for people who might not be able to understand the visuals. To a point that there's stretches of the film where he just kind of disappears, and you can just watch it with the animation. So again, doesn't really ruin the movie for me, but I get why it's an issue for a lot of people, because it does kind of distract from what's going on. And then there's the music. I know the music is also an issue, because there's a lot of songs that come out throughout the movie, paired with the animation, and a lot of it, at least to some people, comes off as very much like, okay, well, if the narration isn't explaining this, then the song will kind of explain the whole thing. Like, hey, look, Spirit was just born, so here's the song, Here I Am. I remember seeing from some review when I was trying to look whether or not the Matt Damon thing was a last minute addition or was part of it from the beginning. Can't remember who said it, but point is that someone pointed that out, and I'm like, okay, I mean, I've heard of this before, but just hearing that specifically, I'm like, okay, I can kind of see what you're saying, but at least while I was watching it, the music just kind of added to it. I mean, it helps that, I mean, as far as I know, a lot of the music was made for the movie. I thought it was cool, but I can kind of understand that some of it was a bit on the nose for whatever situation was going on, but I didn't really mind it. It didn't feel distracting, like something like in the Super Mario Bros. Movie, where it really feels tacked on. I don't know. It's a fun movie. I do think it could be better, but for what it's worth, it's definitely a visual masterpiece. Just from the perspective of, like, okay, we're telling this story mostly through the visuals of these characters, while just having the humans carry the dialogue every now and then, and it's all very simple, very effective. I don't know, it was fully engaging. I mean, I had a hard time pausing it in between breaks, because I was watching it pretty much between work and home. So specifically lunch. No one ever think that I'm watching it while I'm doing my work. Um, I don't know. It's definitely a fun movie. I don't know. I don't know how it plays without the Matt Damon stuff for younger viewers, because again, I do wonder whether or not that might be what got it that. But I don't know. I feel like, even as a kid, when I watched it, I comprehended a lot of it, and it was one of the reasons why the movie was so interesting to me as a kid. Just seeing this movie that essentially told its story entirely by how the animals act, and it's not just like, oh, here's like some wisecracking stuff. I don't know. It's not DreamWorks' best, but I feel it's definitely an underrated one, and I feel like a lot of people owe it at least a watch, especially because while I'm sure most people are willing to, if you probably got into, or at least were made aware of the show through the Netflix show that they made, and then of course the other movie, I don't know if it's supposed to be within the same continuity. I kind of doubt it, because I feel like it's a little bit closer, well, not really closer to modern day, but it's like in a different time period. But I don't know. I just don't know how people feel about that. But this one on its own, just very nice. It's very different from your typical DreamWorks movie. It's very different from your typical just animated movie in general, especially from the West. Especially given its time during its time, people were still very aware of like the Disney Renaissance style of animation because of course a lot of studios were trying to ape off of that. So it was nice to see something where it's like, well, the animals are gonna act like animals. While watching it, aside from the just being entertained by it and being reminded why I even liked the movie, I also realized, man, it's kind of crazy what 2 decades ago looked like within the animation landscape. Not so much just in terms of this being 2D and also just the overall tone and everything, but also this movie's rated G. Now I know some people don't even know what a G rating is anymore because I can't think of many movies that get the G rating anymore. I mean, even the Paw Patrol sequel got a PG rating, and that's a preschool movie. But I feel like the rating system has, I mean, of course it has its merits. Of course it keeps kids from watching, an R-rated movie where characters are going to be swearing and doing all kinds of things. But I do feel like it's kind of become a joke over the years because, I mean, it probably always was, but I don't know. It feels more noticeable now than ever just because you got a lot of these movies that are like, okay, well, this is a movie about, I don't know, well, like any animated movie, a lot of them are very toned down compared to some of the G-rated stuff that was there before. Because, of course, the G rating is supposed to be like, okay, there's general audiences. There's, nothing really that'll be that offensive to anyone. Kids can watch it and whatnot. It's not like a PG movie where you're supposed to have a parent there to kind of keep the kids from going too wild or whatever. Maybe get terrified. I don't know. But you look at a lot of movies that get the PG rating now, and it's like, these are tame, and it's because there's so many restrictions on it. Like, this is a G-rated movie where there's a lot of intent to kill the horse whenever it goes too out of line. There's a lot of scenes where the horse is being, I don't want to say like full-on torture, but it is pretty much essentially being tortured because they're restraining him, hurting him and whatnot, trying to teach him a lesson so that he can break. You even get like the general in the movie at various points, smoking a cigar, which that's a big no-no nowadays. It's just all these kinds of things that I'm like, this is a G-rated movie. It's kind of crazy that, if you put it on today, one, it would be a PG-rated movie at least, and two, some of these things would have been cut from, or just to get the PG rating. The smoking would have been cut, and they probably wouldn't have shown any intent to kill the horse because it would be deemed that too much for kids. It's rare when you actually see villains get killed off in a lot of animated movies now, just because oftentimes they're like, oh, that's too much. We'll show them get arrested or they learned their lesson or something like that. And sometimes it's fine. I don't really think like, oh, they need to kill the villain in order for this story to work. But it is interesting to see. That's kind of where movies have gotten, where a lot of this stuff is considered taboo, even for the higher rating. Wow, this is the landscape we're in now. So it definitely felt off watching this movie, just doing all these things within that rating. I don't know, definite time capsule stuff, and it just reminds me how old I'm getting, and that 20 years ago might as well be 50 years ago, which is crazy because you got a lot of people who will swear up and down that something from 20 years ago shouldn't be considered retro or nostalgic or anything like that because it's not that far from our current times. But it's like, maybe not, but at the same time, the world 20 years ago feels a lot different than the world currently. It definitely feels different here with the rating system, but I don't know. I guess Spirit is really just that intense. I mean, like I said before, the animation is definitely nice, and it definitely highlights a lot of those struggles so well that it's like, yeah, I definitely feel Spirit's tension and everything that's going on. I don't know. Wanted to throw that in just because it definitely caught me off guard watching it again, seeing just how different it is from even a modern PG rated film. Very different movie from a lot of movies that are getting made now, Dreamworks or otherwise. But yeah, it's definitely a solid time. I mean, I guess, in summary, I would say it's definitely a movie that I would recommend to animation fans. Kids will definitely enjoy it. I feel like a lot of the adventure in there is enough for them to grab onto. I don't know if they really need the Matt Damon stuff. I think that could have been dropped, but for what it's worth, it doesn't ruin the movie. At least not for me. I feel like it's there only to explain stuff, and well, it's not necessary. It at least feels like, okay, it's not there all the time. It leaves every now and then, and once it comes back, it's kind of shocking, but only because it's like, oh yeah, I forgot this is a thing that's happening in this movie. Characters are compelling, even if Spirit doesn't really talk outside of narration. I don't know, you care a lot about this stuff. I mean, I've heard people say that this is way too politically correct to capture just how rough the West was, and I can kind of see that, but at the same time, it's like, look, the movie's supposed to be from the horse's perspective. Horse is not going to understand a lot of this stuff. I don't mind if they trim it down to just basically what the horse will understand. And the horse understands that there is a difference between the indigenous people, the Native Americans, to the white man. It's not Pocahontas, if anyone's wondering. Like, it's not the kind of movie where I'm like, man, this is uncomfortable to watch, given that some of the messages are kind of racist nowadays, as well-intentioned as Pocahontas might have been. I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of well-intentioned. It just comes off very racist, and yeah, I'm not a fan of changing history like that. But whatever, not the point. Point being, Spirit, good movie, fun time for kids, fun times for animation enthusiasts, and I feel like even if you're not an animation enthusiast, if you're just an adult watching this, great solid time. It's a fun Western, especially because how often do you get Westerns from the perspective of the horse? And I like the fact that as a Western about a horse, they don't try to make it like, okay, let's just make it a Western, but the horse is not the lead. Like, no, it actually makes you feel and understand what a horse could feel like in the perspective of this time period. It is very much a horse story, is what I'm trying to say. Like, it's not just like, okay, we just have a human character, but we turn them into a horse. Like something like what do you call it? Home on the Range, where you could replace the main characters with humans, and it probably wouldn't play that much differently, other than they wouldn't get kidnapped by a cow wrangler or whatever. Spirit, solid time, beautiful movie, well worth to watch. Again, if you're a fan of animation, you'll love it. If you're a kid, you'll probably enjoy it. I think you will. I enjoyed it as a kid. And if you're an adult who isn't a fan of animation, but still want to watch a good Western, I think this is definitely a fun one to watch, just to get that perspective of like, hey, what might a horse have felt like doing all this Western shit? I say that so bad. But yeah, it's definitely a fun time. Give it a watch. It's available on YouTube for free, as far as I know, free with ads. I believe it might also be on Netflix. I could be wrong, just because I would imagine that they would have it paired up with the show, unless they want to keep it really distant, just to avoid acknowledging how different that is from the show and the recent movie. It's probably also there. I don't know. This movie is not hard to come by. It's just that it's not being searched upon that much. Definitely an underrated movie. It deserves to be seen, and honestly, just a fun time. So, with that said, I'd like to thank you for coming in today and watching this. This has been Octaviano Macias, and I hope to see you again next time. Thanks for stopping by. Go ahead and follow this channel. Subscribe, like, and comment. Ring the bell for notifications. Go ahead and also follow my podcast, and give some love to my Patreon account while you're at it. It's www.patreon.com/saicams. Again, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you come back for more in the future.